Keddie is a small community outside of Quincy, California, in Plumas County. At the core of it all was Keddie Resort, a group of 33 shabby cottages available for long-term rent for around $170 a month. Hikers loved the pine-studded pathways, and the creek was an excellent fishing place. But on April 11, 1981, a vicious quadruple murder that is still unsolved shook and essentially destroyed this peaceful community. Who was responsible for these brutal murders? To escape their violent father and husband, Glenna Sue Sharp and her 5 children, John, Sheila, Tina, Rick, and Greg, left Connecticut in 1979 and moved to Quincy, California, where they took up residence in her brother's trailer. Sue started taking typewriting lessons and working part-time at the Quincy Elks Lodge to get her life together and find a means to support herself and her children. Keddie, a popular family resort nearby, has recently experienced financial difficulties and was turned into low-income housing. The family promptly moved into Cabin 28. Their new home was larger than Sue's brother's trailer, even though they were now living in a tiny, remote town with only one road leading in and out. For the Sharps, things were getting better. On April 12, 1981, Sheila Sharp, then 14 years old, opened the door to Cabin 28 on Keddie Resort Road after a sleepover in the cabin next door. The Sharp family had been living in Cabin 28 for 5 months and had made friends with many townsfolk. When Sheila opened the door, she was hit like a ton of bricks at what she saw. Someone broke into Cabin 28 sometime during the night and brutally killed Sue, her brother John, 15, and Dana Wingate, 17, her brother's friend. Sheila ran back to the nearby cabin where she had spent the night, screaming. A member of the Seabolt family staying in Cabin 27 raced to the lodge at Keddie Resort and alerted the owner, Jan Olbin, who then contacted the authorities. Sheila suddenly realized that her 2 younger brothers, Greg, 10, and Rick, 5, were still inside the cabin with their friend, Justin Smart, aged 12. Amazingly, none of the 3 boys suffered any injuries. Sheila and the Seabolt family helped the boys as they climbed through the window to get out of the blood-soaked house. According to them, they slept through the carnage of the night before. Deputy Hank Clement arrived on the scene first. Before being systematically bludgeoned to death with a claw hammer, all 3 victims were bound with electrical wire and medical tape. Sue and John had been bludgeoned and stabbed multiple times with a knife and had their throats slashed. Due to the intensity of the attack, one of the knives used was bent at a 30-degree angle. Sue was also bludgeoned with a rifle's butt, but fought back, as evidenced by the defensive wounds on her arms. She had her underwear shoved in her mouth and was naked from the waist down when she was discovered. The autopsy revealed that Dana had been strangled to death, in addition to the claw hammer injuries. A knife used in the attack was left in the living room beside the bodies. It had been a frantic and violent assault, but neighbors and the 3 boys sleeping in the room didn't hear a thing. It wasn't just the victims and the floor that had been soaked in blood. Blood was also found on the living room ceiling, one of the bedrooms, and all over the furniture. Sue's bare feet and the soles of one of the boys' shoes were also stained with blood, suggesting they had been mobile during the attack. Both bedroom doors and the back stairs handrails were also covered in blood when the police arrived. It wasn't long before it was realized that Sheila's younger sister, Tina, 12 years old, was missing. Tina and Sheila had planned to spend the night in the Seabolt's cabin, but Sue wouldn't let Tina join her older sister. The area around Keddie was thoroughly searched by members of the Plumas County Search and Rescue Team, but they could not find the missing girl. Lassen, Butte, and Sierra counties, as well as Reno police departments, were all asked to keep an eye out for Tina in an all-points bulletin. The bulletin also requested that the same areas contact local hospitals to see if anyone had been treated for a knife wound within the preceding 48 hours. They assumed that the perpetrator or perpetrators of such a brutal attack would have suffered some sort of injury themselves. The gruesome murders sent shockwaves through the quaint community, and the police started by looking into the victims' last known whereabouts. Several Quincy residents testified that they had seen John and Dana while they were hitchhiking near the intersection of Crescent and Lawrence Streets on the night of the murders, between 9 and 10 p.m. However, at some point during the next 10 hours, the teenagers returned to Keddie Resort, where they were brutally murdered. Since nothing appeared to be missing from the cabin, robbery was quickly eliminated as a possible motive. One of the suspects brought a claw hammer, and another hammer and 2 knives belonging to the Sharps were found inside the cabin, leading investigators to believe the killings were at least partially planned. The fact that neither Greg, Rick, Justin, nor the neighbor who lived only 10 feet away heard a thing during the violent and frenetic attack baffled investigators. It was initially thought that Justin had slept through the entire incident, but he later gave investigators conflicting accounts of what happened. First, he denied seeing anything, but then he claimed he saw the murders through the bedroom window. However, Justin later recanted and said he'd only dreamed about the murder. Justin was able to recall his dream while under hypnosis. He said there were 2 men, one with a mustache and long hair, and the other with shorter hair and no facial hair. According to Justin, one of the men was holding a knife in his right hand, and he used it to stab Sue in the chest. The same man had a hammer in the other hand during the course of his dream. Once again, under the influence of hypnosis, Justin related how Tina had gotten out of bed and come downstairs to see what was going on. Afterward, a man picked up Tina and allegedly carried her through the kitchen and out the back steps. The man came back a few minutes later without Tina. When a psychologist considered Justin's account of the dream, he concluded that Justin had actually seen the murders and, as a coping mechanism, had made the experience sound like a dream. During the first weeks of the investigation, 8 deputies from the Plumas County Sheriff's Office worked on the case non-stop. To uncover new information, they launched a secret witness program. They later released sketches of 2 men spotted in Quincy in the week leading up to the murders. Harlan Embry, a man with no artistic ability and no training in forensic sketching, used Justin's descriptions to create composite sketches of the 2 unknown men. Law enforcement officials never explained why they used a hobbyist who occasionally volunteered for local police instead of professional forensic artists from the Justice Department and the Federal Bureau of Investigation. These men were not considered suspects, but were in the area and disappeared right before the crimes occurred. The sheriff of Plumas County, Doug Thomas, has stated that multiple people saw them. No one ever found out who the 2 men were, and the number of tips gradually decreased until they stopped coming in at all. Over the years, many people have speculated that Tina's killer or killers had sexual motives. The possibility that Tina was still alive and being held hostage was held out by some. Then, in April 1984, a bottle hunter found human remains 50 miles from Keddie, near Feather Falls, northwest of Oroville. A lab was tasked with conducting analysis and identifying the remains. Unfortunately, Tina's identity was confirmed using dental records. Tina died sometime after November 1st, 1981, 6 months after the Keddie murders, according to the medical examiner. Her cause of death was unknown due to the advanced state of decomposition, but it is widely believed that she, too, was murdered. Since then, many hypotheses have been proposed to explain the motives and identities of the murderers. Over the following months and years, there were many possible suspects, very few of whom were publicly identified. However, there was insufficient physical evidence to charge anyone with the gruesome murders. Early on, detectives considered the possibility that the people who picked up John and Dana while they were hitchhiking in Quincy were responsible for their deaths. After dropping off John and Dana, the killers could have forced their way inside the cabin, or the teenagers could have invited them in. The driver who picked them up could have had nothing to do with the murders, according to another theory. According to this theory, John and Dana walked in on the murders during the attack and were killed as a result. Before John and Dana hitchhiked back to the cabin, they went to a party hosted by a prominent family in Quincy. Although there could have been eyewitnesses, nobody came forward because of rumors of drug use at the party. Another theory investigated by police was that Dana and John were followed home from the party by the killers. There were rumors that two men at the party were acting very strangely, but they were never identified. What most likely happened in the Keddie murders? In this case, the main suspects match what Bad Things thinks most likely happened. Martin Ray Smart and John Bobetti were early suspects in the investigation and have remained prime suspects throughout the years. Smart's family occupied the cabin next to Sue's. Keddie apparently had a drug problem at the time of the killings, in which Smart played a significant role. Smart and Bobetti attended a Keddie pub on the night of the killings, dressed in three-piece suits and sunglasses as though they were trying to attract attention to themselves. Patrons at the bar remembered them as being odd, but they did remember them, which might have been the purpose of this odd behavior. Bobetti was connected to Chicago's organized crime families, and both men had criminal records. Before her death, Sue was supposedly advising Marilyn, Smart's wife, to leave her husband because he was aggressive and had affairs behind her back. Meanwhile, rumors spread that Sue and Smart secretly had an affair. Investigators had hypothesized that Smart had found out that Sue and Marilyn had been communicating on how to leave her abusive husband. Some detectives believed that Smart and Marilyn were equally possessive and jealous of one another. Several locals besides Smart and Bobetti were suspected by some investigators to have been implicated in the murders. From this, many detectives have deduced that Sue was the night's intended victim and that the others were killed for no other reason than that they were eyewitnesses. Smart was questioned by police shortly after the killings and nonchalantly told them that a hammer was missing from his toolbox. Smart and Bobetti left Plumas County for Klamath Falls, Oregon shortly after being questioned. In a letter to Marilyn, Smart declares his love for her and adds, "I've paid the price for your love, and now I've bought it with 4 people's lives." It was reported in 2016 that a Veterans Administration counselor in Reno, Nevada, had provided information linking Smart to the Keddie killings. The therapist claims that Smart confessed to her about the killings when he was a patient only a few weeks after the murders. He reportedly said, "I killed the woman and the daughter, but I didn't have anything to do with the boys." He most likely said this to alleviate his guilt about the murders of Sue and Tina, who was still missing at the time. When pushed further, the counselor wanted to know why Tina didn't escape. Smart said that he had incapacitated her and then had to murder her due to her being a possible eyewitness. The therapist suggested that Smart's belief that Sue was to blame for Marilyn seeking a divorce served as an incentive for murder in Smart's eyes. Smart and Bobetti were found to be telling the truth of their innocence after being subjected to lie detector tests. They both passed away without ever being charged. Polygraph tests have been romanticized in movies and on television programs. The reliability of polygraph tests has been debated for decades. None of the physiological responses seen during deception are specific to the act. Truthful answers from an honest person may cause anxiety, while dishonest ones may not. During the 1988 investigation into the murder of 74-year-old Viola Manville, the killer passed a polygraph while an innocent man failed it, marking one of the most significant failures of the polygraph in history. Frank Sterling was falsely accused of murder and later confessed after failing a polygraph test taken by the New York State Police. Meanwhile, Mark Christie, who passed a polygraph administered by the New York State Police and went on to kidnap and murder 4-year-old Callie Ann Poulton, was found guilty of Manville's murder and sentenced to life in prison. Did Smart and Bobetti beat their polygraph tests and get away with 4 murders? On March 24, 2016, Plumas County Special Investigator Mike Gamberg found a hammer in a pond that matched the description of the one Martin said he lost. Sheriff Hagwood, who knew the Sharp family, said, "The location it was found, it would have been intentionally put there. It would not have been accidentally misplaced." Gamberg noted that 6 people were considered possible suspects in 2016. A piece of tape found at the murder scene had DNA matching that of a live suspect, Gamberg said, in April 2018. The Sharp murders have never been solved despite a thorough investigation and are widely considered as Plumas County's most perplexing unsolved crime. The tourist town collapsed after the murders. Tourists started avoiding Keddie in droves out of fear when the murderer was never caught. The town of Keddie is now mostly abandoned and decrepit. Even though it has been over 4 decades since the crimes were committed, the detectives never give up faith that justice will be done. "I think it will be solved. It's just that the killers are still lucky after all these years," said Deputy Lieutenant Don Stoy. If you love our content and want to support the channel, feel free to check our web shop where you can find exclusive true crime merch brought to you by Bad Things.